start our journey in ancient Greece. Behind me is the Iera Odos, the sacred way, the ancient highway in Greece which connected Athens, the capital city, with Eleusis, the site of the temple of Demeter. Of course, ChatGPT drew this for me. Now, as you can imagine, being the only national highway in ancient Greece, the road was full of travelers all day and all night, and many dangers awaited these travelers. None more so than the robber Procrustes. Procrustes would lie in wait of weary travelers and entice them with the offer of a bed to rest on. Just one condition, you had to fit on the bed. Now, Procrustes was no ordinary mortal. He was a son of Poseidon, the sea god. And the bed was no ordinary bed. Try however much you try, you just wouldn't fit on the bed. Now, if your body was too short for the bed, Procrustes would proceed to stretch your body and stretch your body till you literally died. Then he would proceed to rob you. Now, if your head jutted out, Procrustes would cut off the head. And if it was your legs that jutted out, Procrustes would chop off the legs. Let me just pause the story for a second. It's a very gory story, so let's just take a quick pause. Have you heard this story before? I don't see too many show of hands. Now, in case you think you have not heard this, let me just put a corporate twist to this. Have you ever been part of any project where the original idea got stretched and stretched and stretched till it eventually gave up the ghost? Or maybe you were part of projects where the original idea got twisted around that it literally lost its head. Or maybe you were a part of a project where over a period of time, all of the resources, the bandwidth, the people, the budget, all of it got chopped off. Literally, that the project hobbled on and never really reached anywhere. Exploring new frontiers is an amazing and exciting endeavor, but there are many dangers that await travelers on this lonely road. In the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to try and create a small framework that will work as a handy tool guide. And for this, I will be using 3 different interpretations of the word vector. Vector as a metaphor for efficiency, vector as a metaphor for scale, and vector as a metaphor for momentum. Now, since I'm a marketer, I will start with one of the most vexing problems in marketing. How do you know whether things actually work? The American businessman John Wanamaker very succinctly put the problem like this. I know that 50% of my marketing works, 50% of my advertising works, but I do not know which 50%. Delivering your target message to the specific target audience with minimal distribution loss and minimal loss in information is the holy grail of marketing. Now, if I were to abstract this out further as making sure that you are able to specifically deliver to any target. If your information payload is delivered to a specific target with minimal distribution loss and minimal value, then you will find that this paradigm is literally valid for practically every domain of human industry. Take medicine, for example. For a medicine to work, it needs to be delivered to its target site. Now, the routes of administration available to us, like tablets, which are oral dosage forms, and IV injections and intramuscular injections, all rely on the underlying blood circulation system, which is an inherently inefficient way of working. In the 1970s, scientists came up with an amazing idea. Viruses are the most abundant organisms on Earth, and viral infections are probably the best payload delivery mechanisms that we know. And for a very simple reason, that's how they multiply. So when a viral infection happens, the virus will enter the human body and reach its intended destination, a human cell, through specific receptor pathways. And then it will proceed to dump its genetic material inside the human cells, virtually converting the human cells into a factory which will mass produce copies of itself. The thought that the scientists had was this: can we hijack this mechanism? What if we were to capture virus, snip out its genetic material, replace it with genetic material that will code for a specific protein that can work as a drug and then use the regular infection mechanism to deliver into human cells. If we succeed in that, then we are essentially using the human body itself to produce drugs that will combat diseases. If we do that, we are actually converting the virus into a vector, which is a biological meaning of the word vector, a carrying organism which will carry whatever is required to the intended destination. And this works. And this, if I may just point out, is a very viral idea. And this works. In the market today, there are several therapies out there which depend on a viral vector mechanism to cure diseases like infectious diseases as well as cancer. Now, the focus here is on efficiency, is on distribution efficiency, making sure that your payload is delivered to the intended site with as minimal distribution loss and as minimal viability loss as possible. And this, whenever you're looking at exploring new frontiers, is a critical component, because if you do not have distribution efficiency, your projects are likely to be commercially non-viable. And what we are doing here is the equivalent of transporting the pilgrim all the way to Elysis, circumventing the bed of Procras. So that was dimension 1. Now moving on to dimension 2, vector as a metaphor for scale. Now here I'm going to design. In design, a vector is any quantity that can scale without breaking or pixelating. Now here, the question that we are asking ourselves is, will our idea scale? If our idea was put on the bed of Procras, will it actually scale? And let me give you a brilliant example of this in actual practice. For this, we will travel to London to the year 1933. The London Metro has already been in existence for about 7 years. This is how the London Underground map looked. Obviously, the authorities were in search of a little bit more of a simpler way of representing all of this, so that they could actually bring more travelers to use the mass rapid transport system. Eventually, they took up the design which was submitted by a draughtsman called Harry Beck. This was a design which was submitted by Harry Beck, which you can see on the right. Notice anything interesting about it? For starters, it's actually not even a map. It is a diagrammatic representation. Traditional forms of maps rely on geographical accuracy, topographical accuracy, and having accurate representation of distances between landmarks, because that is what is used in road transport. Now, what Beck understood intuitively was that the request was not to really create a simpler representation of a map. It was to create a navigation tool which would allow more passengers to use a railroad system. So he did away with all of the things that didn't scale. He literally converted the map into a series of vertical, horizontal, and 45-degree lines, all radiating out from the central railway line. And then he color-coded the various roads. And the next thing that he did was, he positioned stations on these lines as points which are equidistant from each other. As he himself said later on, when you're traveling underground, geography doesn't matter. So what did we really do here? And more importantly, did this idea scale? Of course it did. It did. Now I have with me a souvenir which my parents picked up when they traveled to London way back in 1980, almost 50 years after Harry Beck drew his map. Now, as you can see, the representation is pretty much similar to the original representation which you can see in the second image. And the third image is a London Tube map as it looks right now. Again, it has expanded in complexity, but the original design still holds good on the bed of Procras. Not only that, this has inspired similar designs across various cities wherever there are metros. And probably the latest example being our own Nama Metro, which is also inspired from this. So what lesson do we really pick up from all of this? The key question when you are exploring new frontiers is to keep asking yourself, is my idea going to scale? And in order to answer that question, you need to remove the non-scalable components and to reduce your overall idea into the equivalent of lines, points, and shapes. So that was about vector as a metaphor for scale. Moving on to the next dimension, which is vector as a metaphor for momentum. Momentum, of course, is a concept from physics. So we will be picking up the physics meaning of the word vector. Vector in physics, of course, represents any quantity which has got both magnitude and direction. So in the last two examples that I gave showcased the ingenuity of human beings and the advances of human knowledge. Here we are going to go in exactly the opposite direction for our example. Let us look at our ignorance of some very, very common phenomena. Almost all of us in this room ride bicycles. More than 1 million people ride bicycles every day. But apparently, human science is still not able to fully explain how it is that a cyclist is able to maintain momentum without falling down while riding a bike. Or consider a second factoid. This is my personal favorite example. Human beings have been using shoes with shoelaces for a very, very long period of time. But apparently, the majority of us get it wrong when we tie our shoelaces. And as a result, as we walk a short distance, the shoelaces start coming off. Now, let me just dig a little bit deeper into this. It's not completely true that we don't understand what is going on. For example, we know that there is a correct way of tying shoelaces and a wrong way of tying shoelaces. Typically, when we tie shoelaces, how we start it is, we start with the left lace and then loop it over the right lace to form the first knot. Then we form the loops, and again the left loop goes over the right loop to form the second knot. This apparently is an inefficient process. It's very simple to actually make it efficient. All you need to do is to just reverse one of the steps. So if you're starting with the left lace over the right lace for the first knot, in the second knot, you change direction, and then what you do is you put the right loop over the left loop. The knot that you form then is going to stay secure for a longer period of time. What does all of this have to do with our exploring of new frontiers and the framework that we are trying to build? Quite simple. Explorations of new frontiers are very complex projects. It has a number of moving parts, and each of these components has its own mass and velocity. The mass part, all of the activities we do in that project, is fairly easy to understand. In the shoelace example, it represents the two steps, tying of the two knots. But the directional component of it is not that easy to understand. Just by making a switch in the direction, we would have been able to create a knot that stays secure for a longer period of time. Now, I keep talking about the shoelaces because do you know how ancient shoes and shoelaces are? What is the oldest example of a shoe with shoelaces that we ever know? This is the oldest example that is there with us. This is an example from Armenia. The shoe with shoelaces is 5,500 years old. And that's a really, really long time to carry on with an inefficient process. Hence, when we look at exploring new frontiers, it is extremely important for us to stop every now and then, ask this one very simple question. Are all of the activities in this project directionally aligned? Is my project gaining momentum, or is it losing momentum? For a sort of conclusion, we are back on era orders. And let me ask you a variant of the question that I asked when I started this conversation. Have you ever traveled on era orders? And if you think the answer is no, all of us have. Even at this particular moment, all of us are actually traveling on the sacred way, on our quest to reach Elysis. Let me explain. The journey starts at Athens, which is a capital city, the seat of power, the seat of authority, and the provider of all resources. This is where you get your approvals and your budget to actually start a journey, especially one which involves exploring frontiers. Your quest is to reach the city of Elysis, which is a temple of Demeter, which is a site of enlightenment. And Elysis, of course, represents our goals. Any quest that we have. It could be personal goals, it could be career goals, it could be company-related goals, it could even be projects that you're working on with other people right now. On the road, there are several dangers. Procras is, of course, the most major one of them. But it's not all about dangers. The building that you see on the left is the Academy of Plato, the Greek philosopher. In ancient history, the Academy of Plato stood kind of midway between Athens and Eleusis. The Academy, of course, represents the fountain of all human knowledge. As you are on your quest, this is where you will pick up your knowledge from. In fact, the English word for institution of higher learning, academy, comes from the Academy of Plato. And finally, have a look at the travelers on the road. The unfortunate thing about these travelers is that not all of them are going to reach their end destination. Procrastination is a thief of time, but Procrustes is a thief of purpose. As my favorite philosopher, the mother of Forrest Gump, said, life is a box of chocolates. You never really know what you're going to get on the road to Eleusis. And hence, it is always good for us to take a step every now and then and ask us these three fundamental questions about momentum, about scale, and about efficiency. Overall, asking yourself, am I vectorizing this? So fellow travelers on the road to Eleusis, all the very best and see you on the other side. Thank you.